Key West is an island in the Straits of Florida, within the U.S. state of Florida. Together with all parts of the separate islands of Dredger's Key, Fleming Key, Sunset Key, and the northern part of Stock Island, it constitutes the city of Key West. The island of Key West is about 4 miles long and 1 mile wide, with a total land area of 4.2 square miles. It lies at the southernmost end of US Route 1, the longest north-south road in the United States. Key West is about 95 miles north of Cuba at their closest points. It is also 130 miles southwest of Miami by air, about 165 miles by road, and 106 miles north-northeast of Havana. The city of Key West is the county seat of Monroe County, which includes a majority of the Florida Keys and part of the Everglades. The total land area of the city is 5.6 square miles. The official city motto is "One Human Family." Key West is the southernmost city in the contiguous United States and the westernmost island connected by highway in the Florida Keys. Duval Street, its main street, is 1.1 miles in length in its 14-block-long crossing from the Gulf of Mexico to the Straits of Florida and the Atlantic Ocean. Key West is the southern terminus of US Route 1. The Southernmost Point buoy is an anchored concrete buoy in Key West, Florida, marking the southernmost point in the continental United States, the lowest latitude land of contiguous North American states. It is 18 feet above sea level. The large painted buoy was established as a tourist attraction in 1983 by the city at the corner of South Street and Whitehead Street. The southernmost point was originally marked with a small sign, before the city of Key West erected the now famous concrete buoy in 1983. The concrete buoy has overall withstood several hurricanes and is a gathering place for photographs and tourists. The paint job was damaged by Hurricane Irma in September 2017, but it was refurbished later that year by the original artist. Cuba is roughly 90 miles south of this point in Key West, although this was not originally on the marker, but rather on a smaller sign next to marker. Naval Air Station Key West is a naval air station and military airport located on Boca Chica Key, 4 miles east of the Central Business District of Key West, Florida, United States. NAS Key West is a training facility for air-to-air combat fighter aircraft of all military services, with favorable flying conditions year-round and nearby aerial ranges. The station and its associated offshore air combat maneuvering ranges are equipped with the P5 Combat Training System/Tactical Combat Training System, which tracks and records aerial maneuvers. On a broader scale, NAS Key West's national security mission supports operational and readiness requirements for the Department of Defense, Department of Homeland Security, Air National Guard and Army National Guard units, other federal agencies, and allied military forces. The air station is also host to several tenant commands, including Fighter Squadron Composite 111, Strike Fighter Squadron 106 Detachment Key West, the U.S. Army Special Forces Underwater Operations School and Headquarters, Joint Interagency Task Force South. The Florida Keys are a coral cay archipelago located off the southern coast of Florida, forming the southernmost part of the continental United States. They begin at the southeastern coast of the Florida Peninsula, about 15 miles south of Miami, and extend in a gentle arc south-southwest and then westward to Key West, the westernmost of the inhabited islands, and onto the uninhabited dry Tortugas. The islands lie along the Florida Straits, dividing the Atlantic Ocean to the east from the Gulf of Mexico to the northwest, and defining one edge of Florida Bay. At the nearest point, the southern part of Key West is just 90 miles from Cuba. The Florida Keys are between about 24.3 and 25.5 degrees north latitude. More than 95% of the land area lies in Monroe County, but a small portion extends northeast into Miami-Dade County, such as Totten Key. The total land area is 137.3 square miles. As of the 2010 census, the population was 73,090 with an average density of 532.34 per square mile, although much of the population is concentrated in a few areas of much higher density, such as the city of Key West, which has 32% of the entire population of the Keys. The U.S. Census population estimate for 2014 is 77,136. The city of Key West is the county seat of Monroe County. The county consists of a section on the mainland which is almost entirely in Everglades National Park, and the Keys Islands from Key Largo to the dry Tortugas. The Bahia-Honda Rail Bridge is a derelict railroad bridge in the lower Florida Keys connecting Bahia-Honda Key with Spanish Harbor Key. Originally part of the Overseas Railway, the state of Florida purchased it from the Florida East Coast Railway after the 1935 Labor Day hurricane and converted it for automobile use as part of the Overseas Highway in 1938. After a replacement Bahia-Honda Bridge was opened in 1972, two spans of the old bridge were removed for the safety of boat traffic and to prevent pedestrian access to unsafe parts of the bridge. 7-mile bridge is a bridge in the Florida Keys, in Monroe County, Florida, United States. It connects Knights Key in the Middle Keys to Little Duck Key in the Lower Keys. Among the longest bridges in existence when it was built, it is part of the Overseas Highway in the Keys, which is part of the 2,369-mile U.S. Route 1. There are 2 bridges in this location. The modern bridge is open to vehicular traffic, the older one only to pedestrians and cyclists. The older bridge, originally known as the Knights Key Pigeon Key Moser Channel Passage Channel Bridge, was constructed from 1909 to 1912 under the direction of Henry Flagler and Clarence S. Coe as part of the Florida East Coast Railway's Key West extension, also known as the Overseas Railroad. is a city in the middle of the Florida Keys, in Monroe County, Florida, United States. As of the 2020 census, the city had a population of 9,689, up from 8,297 in 2010. The name Marathon dates back to the origin of the Florida East Coast Railroad. The name came from the railroad workers who were working night and day to complete the railway. Due to the unrelenting pace and struggle to complete the project, workers complained that this is getting to be a real marathon, and the word was later used to name the local railroad station. The Keys historian Dan Gallagher in his book Florida's Great Ocean Railway credits New York playwright Witter Binner for naming Marathon. According to Gallagher, J.R. Parrott, then Florida East Coast Railway's president and general manager, invited Brinner to the Keys to plot stations for the railroad. When asked to generate a name for the station at Key Backer, Brinner proposed Marathon, inspired by the following passage from Byron: "The mountains look on Marathon and Marathon looks on the sea." 」 . Long Key State Park is a 965-acre Florida state park located on Long Key, one of the Florida Keys, in Monroe County, Florida, United States. It is at mile marker 67.5 on US 1-67400 Overseas Highway. Prehistoric coral reefs grew here over the course of millennia, when the sea level was over 20 feet deeper. The remnants came to form Long Key, and the rest of the Florida Keys. By the early 20th century, Long Key became an important depot for the completed Key West extension of the Florida East Coast Railroad. The railroad's founder, Henry Flagler, also established the Long Key Fishing Camp, a resort that attracted the greatest saltwater fishermen from around the world. But it did not last for long, when in 1935, the Labor Day hurricane devastated the club, the railroad, and much of the Keys. The land that came to comprise the park was acquired between 1961 and 1973, with the official opening in 1969. Isla Morada, also sometimes Isla Morada, is an incorporated village in Monroe County, Florida, United States. It is located directly between Miami and Key West on 5 islands: T-Table Key, Lower Matecumbe Key, Upper Matecumbe Key, Windley Key and Plantation Key in the Florida Keys. As of the 2020 census, the village had a population of 7,107, up from 6,119 in 2010. History. The name Isla Morada, Purple Island, came from early Spanish explorers in the area. Isla Morada was the location of one of the stations of the Overseas Railroad. Isla Morada was hit almost directly by the Labor Day hurricane of 1935, causing 423 deaths. A memorial, including the ashes of over 300 victims, exists today at Overseas Highway mile marker 82. Hall of Fame baseball player Ted Williams began visiting Isla Morada in 1943 and for the next 45 years was the island's most well-known resident. After his retirement from baseball, he became the national spokesman for Sears Sporting Goods and became renowned for his abilities as a fisherman. Over the decades, he hosted numerous celebrities at his Isla Morada house and took them on local fishing trips. The village was incorporated on December 31, 1997. Prior to this date, Isla Morada referred to the evolving community island of Upper Matecumbe Key. The Florida Reef is the only living coral barrier reef in the continental United States. It is the third largest coral barrier reef system in the world. It lies a few miles seaward of the Florida Keys, is about 4 miles wide and extends 270 kilometers from Foy Rocks just east of Soldier Key to just south of the Marquesas Keys. The barrier reef tract forms a great arc, concentric with the Florida Keys, with the northern end, in Biscayne National Park, oriented north-south, and the western end, south of the Marquesas Keys, oriented east-west. The rest of the reef outside Biscayne National Park lies within John Pennekamp Coral Reef State Park and the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary. Isolated coral patch reefs occur northward from Biscayne National Park as far north as Stewart, in Martin County. Coral reefs are also found in dry Tortugas National Park west of the Marquesas Keys. There are more than 6,000 individual reefs in the system. The reefs are 5,000 to 7,000 years old, having developed since sea levels rose following the Wisconsin glaciation. The densest and most spectacular reefs, along with the highest water clarity, are found to the seaward of Key Largo and Elliott Key, where the two long keys help protect the reefs from the effects of water exchange with Florida Bay, Biscayne Bay, Card Sound, and Barnes Sound. The bays and sounds tend to have lower salinity, higher turbidity, and wider temperature variations than the water in the open ocean. Channels between the keys allow brackish water from the bays to flow onto the reefs, limiting their growth. The corals on Florida coast are under threat from human activity. These essential ecosystems are being ravaged by pollution, human activity, and elevated water temperatures. In response, there are a few coral restoration non-profits operating between Miami and the Florida Keys. They plant corals on the reefs in the hope to restore the coral populations in the area. John Pennekamp Coral Reef State Park is a Florida state park located on Key Largo in Florida. It includes approximately 70 nautical square miles of adjacent Atlantic Ocean waters. The park is approximately 25 miles in length and extends 3 miles into the Atlantic Ocean. It was the first underwater park in the United States. The park was added to the National Register of Historic Places on April 14, 1972. The primary attractions of the park are the coral reefs and their associated marine life. In fiscal year 2004, the park had more than 1 million visitors, making it the most popular park in the Florida State Park system. The Florida Keys and the Flower Garden Banks in the Gulf of Mexico off the Texas coast are the only living coral reef formations in the continental United States. Turkey Point Nuclear Generating Station is a twin-reactor nuclear power station located on a 3,300-acre site 2 miles east of Homestead, Florida, United States, next to Biscayne National Park located about 25 miles south of Miami, Florida near the southernmost edge of Miami-Dade County. Including the 2 nuclear plants, Turkey Point operates 3 power generating units. It comprises 2 retired 404 megawatt fuel oil/natural gas/used oil/propane fired generation units, 2 802 MW Westinghouse pressurized water reactors, and a 1,150 megawatts combined cycle gas-fired Unit 5. It serves the entire southern portion of Florida. With a combined operational capacity of 2,754 megawatts, the site is the 3rd largest generating station in Florida and the 6th largest power plant in the United States. The Cape Florida Light is a lighthouse on Cape Florida at the south end of Key Biscayne in Miami-Dade County, Florida. Constructed in 1825, it guided mariners off the Florida Reef, which starts near Key Biscayne and extends southward a few miles offshore of the Florida Keys. It was operated by staff, with interruptions, until 1878, when it was replaced by the Foy Rocks Lighthouse. The lighthouse was put back into use in 1978 by the U.S. Coast Guard to mark the Florida Channel, the deepest natural channel into Biscayne Bay. They decommissioned it in 1990. Within the Bill Baggs Cape Florida State Park since 1966, the lighthouse was relit in 1996. It is owned and operated by the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. Downtown Miami is the urban city center of Miami, Florida. The city's greater downtown region consists of the Central Business District, Brickell, the Historic District, Government Center, the Arts and Entertainment District, and Park West. It is divided by the Miami River and is bordered by Midtown Miami's Edgewater and Wynwood sections to its north, Biscayne Bay to its east, the Health District and Overtown to its west, and Coconut Grove to its south. Downtown Miami is the core of the Miami metropolitan area, the nation's 9th largest and world's 34th largest metropolitan area with a population of 6.158 million people. Within downtown Miami, Brickell Avenue and Biscayne Boulevard are the main north-south roads, and Flagler Street is the main east-west road. The downtown Miami perimeters are defined by the Miami Downtown Development Authority as the 3.8 square miles area east of Interstate 95 between Rickenbacker Causeway to the south and the Julia Tuttle Causeway, which connects Miami and Miami Beach, to the north. The area is a cultural, financial, and commercial center of the Miami metropolitan area, tracing its present-day history back to the 19th century. In recent years, downtown Miami has the third greatest concentration of high-rises in the United States and is home to many major museums, parks, education centers, banks, company headquarters, courthouses, government offices, theaters, shops, and many of the oldest buildings in the city. Brickell is a neighborhood in Miami, Florida located directly east of Interstate 95, south of the historic CBD, and north of Coconut Grove. Brickell is known as the financial district of Miami, as well as South Florida. As South Florida's financial district, Brickell is the core of Miami's banking, investment, and financial sectors. The Arts and Entertainment District is an urban neighborhood with numerous hotels and high-rises. Public transportation in the downtown area is used more than in any other part of downtown life.